Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. So I wanted to talk a little bit about constancy. Constancy is a great power. What we're being constant to in our various ways is our own nature, our real nature. We're being constant to the deepest longing of our heart. So that's the source of constancy. Constancy, the source of it is not willpower. The source of it is not, I said I would do this, so I'm going to do it. The source of real constancy is recognizing what you really want and being true to it. Now, that has a lot of expressions, and some of those expressions might feel tedious at times or might need us to exercise something we could call willpower at some times. But the actual source of constancy is this recognition of what goodness is, of what you want. The major form of constancy that we practice is doing our practice every day. That has some really interesting effects, that form of constancy. One of the things I've said a lot of times is that a good practice is the one that you do. So there's no sense in being constant in our practice and doing our practice every day without fail. There's no sense that some days we do well and other days we don't do well. The doing well is in being constant and constant to our real desire. Even when on particular days or in particular moments we might feel a lot of resistance. Just because we feel resistance doesn't mean we can't also feel our real desire. That's what makes resistance occur, is when our real desire meets some other kind of pattern. So the first, middle, and last effect of constancy in a relative sense is that it wears away other patterns. So by creating this very, very strong pattern of constancy in our everyday practice, we slowly, over time, wear away the patterns of limitation. And because of this, it means that really our number one tool is to do our practice every day with that feeling of, I'm doing this because this is addressing my deepest longing. So even when we're having a bad day, so-called, we feel a lot of resistance, or we don't want to do it, or we have some pain, or we have some other thing we think we would rather be doing, we have this kind of sincerity about what it is we really want in our lives. If we're doing constancy from the right place, then it is an expression of our sincerity. It's an expression of our honesty about what we want in life. Even when it seems distant, even when it seems hard to get in touch with, we can still feel that sincerity of desire, and we can surrender to it. And then what comes out of that is constancy. When we're being constant in our practice, we are surrendering. Especially in this culture where, doing spiritual practice every day, let alone an hour or more of spiritual practice every day, is not the norm. And in fact, so much not the norm that when you tell other people about it, or your relatives, or even yourself, there are voices that argue this is not the right, proper way to live. So in this culture, in this time, it really requires a great deal of surrender to keep practicing, surrendering to what you know is the truth about yourself. That's what you're surrendering to. And the process of taking your seat more and more in your own self, taking your seat in your own real nature, taking refuge in your own real nature more and more, bit by bit, every day. So constancy has nothing to do with pleasing somebody else. It has nothing to do with just following a rule for the sake of following a rule. It has nothing to do with some promise you made during an initiation or some other place. None of those things really can support the kind of constancy that it requires to really wake up. The only thing that can support that is what you want for yourself. So when we surrender to our heart's desire, that's much scarier than surrendering to some idea we have about surrender to a teacher, or a vow, or something like that. Surrendering to our heart's desire is much scarier because we can't get away from it. We can leave a teacher, we can leave a community, we can break a vow, but we can't get away from our deepest longing once we've identified it. Right? So there's a sense of that surrender and the constancy that emerges from that kind of surrender is really something that sweeps us away, something that we can rail against. We can even get angry at our own sincerity. Once having discovered it, somehow our own sincerity, our own contact with our own heart's longing can sometimes feel like a very heavy taskmaster, which is kind of funny, but it's true that can happen. But it's this kind of constancy, this sincere constancy that emerges naturally out of surrender to what we really want, right? That brings about incrementally, without us doing anything else other than showing up in a sincere way, that incrementally unwinds our habit patterns of limitation. So if we do nothing else, we should recognize what it is we really want and surrender to that and be constant in our practice. We don't have to do any other work really on ourselves. I mean, we do because we like to keep busy. But really all we need to do is try to be doing our practice every day and being in the state of our practice every day and surrendering to that process. And that takes care of everything. Now, the other thing about constancy, it sounds like something that is day by day, minute by minute, slow and incremental, as I said a minute ago. Constancy is all those things, but it also leads to abrupt change or a dramatic change. So my experience is that constancy to myself, to my own real nature, to my own heart, to my practice, that brings about dramatic change every now and then in a surprising way. So it's both the incremental change that Ma talks about, like water dripping on a stone, and it is also what brings about dramatic change when you're not really expecting it, because who could expect it, really? But every now and then, just the simple sincerity and surrender that gives rise to constancy will bring about some kind of dramatic opening or insight or shift of some sort or another. So really, in my experience, everything comes out of that, and there really isn't much else that's needed. And having said that, again, it takes a lot of courage to follow your heart. It takes a lot of courage, having recognized what it is you really want, and that thing being at odds with some stuff in our culture and in our time, It takes a lot of courage to just keep following that. Of course, when you are deep enough into it, there isn't really a choice. So you're following, but you're also being led, and you're surrendering, but you're also surrendered by it. I mean, there's really no way to describe it. I have never really been able to do anything but follow that wisdom from my heart whenever I could hear it or sense it, despite the fact that it's definitely caused problems for me at times, like ordinary life problems. But it's the constancy to that makes everything happen. And at some point, although you may be, afraid of what it is you really deeply desire, having recognized that you may be afraid of that at times, at some point you'll 100% realize that you don't actually have any choice but to follow it. Your own sincerity and integrity won't let you follow anything else. There won't be any other choice. That doesn't mean you won't still resist things. I don't think it's possible to change without resistance. So when we think about the ordinary work of just sitting down and doing practice every day, or showing up for the community in some way, or whatever it is that you're doing, try to identify that you're doing it as an expression of your own sincerity, your own desire to take refuge in your own self, a sense of surrender to that desire, and that's what results in your ability to be constant in your practice and all the other expressions of your sadhana. The vows that we take, or the promises that you make, or the rules that you agree to, are really just expressions of that. And if you didn't, in your heart of hearts, want to follow those things, you wouldn't do it. Now, it's true that some of us have mixed motives for agreeing to those things, or maybe we just have motives that really have nothing to do with having recognized this desire to take refuge in one's own self. And in that case, lots of different things can happen. We can eventually stumble upon that desire, or we can just eventually, stop following because it's not really our thing. We were just fooling ourselves. But I don't think anybody here is in that condition. But if you are, it's good to find that out too. So there really isn't any other constancy other than, you could say, constancy to nature, constancy to your nature, constancy, as it says in the Joey, to the Tao, to that unknowable whatever that pulls us along. And when you recognize that, then you really have some spiritual maturity. When you recognize that you're doing this because of your inner condition, your inner awareness, your inner recognition. When you know that for sure, you really have some spiritual maturity then.